Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of having my brother from the NUR Fatimiya Sufi Order, Brother Stephan Beyer, return for these insightful conversations and dialogue that he always offers us. And tonight, Brother Stephan will be talking about the Israel-Palestine situation. It's interesting because right before this October 7 conflict started, our last podcast, Brother Stephan Beyer did talk about the Israel-Palestine situation. So it's an interesting synchronicity that something like that, he offered the solution and his wisdom on the conflict in the previous episode, right before the conflict. And now this is basically like, I told you so type of moment because people don't listen to good people like him or me or Sheikh Wahid and other people who are always giving humanity the solution. So without further ado, how are you, Brother Stephan? Thank you again for your wisdom and your time. And Nur alaikum. Please take it away.
All right. I'm doing pretty good. Had a really great day today so far.
Good.
And I've been very troubled, though, by some of the news I've been seeing. Some things definitely seemed inconsistent to me, and that started early on. And I think some of the most clear problems have to do with lies from the media and lies from the state of Israel. So some of the things that are really horrifying a scenario here, and some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is circumstantial evidence. But I do want to point out that circumstantial evidence in some cases is actually enough to convict. That's not what I'm going to be trying to do tonight. I'm going to simply trying to be suggesting to particularly people in Israel and particularly Jewish Israelis, I want them to investigate this further because really the solution can only come when they realize that the current situation is very bad for them, that the right-wing government of Israel is actually using them as human shields. And when they take a stand, things will change. So where to start? I think the big thing that we've noticed is there was a warning from Egypt and possibly a couple of other states within the Five Eyes that seemed to have information where they thought that an event was about to take place. And this is on record coming to Israel 3 days before October 7th. And then there's more and more circumstantial evidence that really makes that picture get very scary. So there's a couple of things that I've noticed. One, the music festival was actually moved on short notice after that warning came to be where it was. And it was so close to Gaza that supposedly, if I understand it correctly, people in Gaza could actually hear some of the party from where they were. One of the other things that's very interesting and rather disturbing here is Netanyahu actually claimed that he had not been warned, and people within his own government made him delete the post, and he had to take that post down. And it was a really short post. It basically only said that, it wasn't my fault. I had no way of knowing. And it had this rather cryptic rebuke from within Israel. And it was posted on his timeline, that was wrong and that he needed to take it down, and he did. And Netanyahu's not one to admit a mistake. like ever. He seems, in my opinion, to be a very narcissistic individual, who, similar in many ways to Donald Trump, is incapable of ever admitting fault. Even when the choices he makes leads to disaster. Um, so we've got other information that comes out that's rather interesting and disturbing. And I think it starts to paint a picture of a scenario that's not a false flag event, but it's called defensive battle. So there's two videos that I recommend, but particularly the defensive battle. The other one is called Surprise Attack, from sort of a military history channel type educational video called Battle Plan. And I'll think I can send you the links on those. The big thing in a defensive battle is not letting the civilian community or the soldiers who fight a defensive battle know that they are fighting in a defensive battle where they've essentially been set up and the enemy is provoked so that they attack. And this can be used politically to create unity, to end protests. Considering Netanyahu's position when this event took place, Israel was on the brink of a constitutional crisis with a conflict between the parliament and the courts over the basic laws and how they, if it's reasonable for parliament to be unreasonable. They wanted to get rid of the reasonableness standard.
Yeah, that makes sense, Brother Stephen, because I recently saw an interview right after the October 7th situation, and it was a former IDF soldier. She's a woman, and she was part of the Border Patrol team, like during her time of service. And she said there's no way that the IDF and the Mossad didn't know that this was going to happen, since that border, even if like a small animal moves through it, like a cat or anything like that, they're on alert like right away. So she's saying the same thing, that they deliberately stood down and allowed this to happen. One, to justify their extermination and occupation of Gaza, to finalize their colonization and annexation of that land. And second was the Netanyahu political situation, to have the whole world rally behind him. So this is like a problem, reaction, solution type of scenario. And one of Mossad's motto is, by deception, thou shalt do war. And that's exactly what is taking place, unfortunately, as the anti-Muslim hate crimes have gone back to the pre-9/11 levels. And it's so unfortunate, all the hard work that people did for community awareness, building communities, it's all back to square one. So let's see where the
I
future goes.
In some ways, there has been a lot of blowback against the community, but there has also, from young people, been a lot more support. I remember in college having very few allies who wanted to take a stand for Palestinian solidarity. Now it seems to be a cause where it's mobilizing the younger generations. So I think diversity has had a huge impact. Once Americans live and work and go to school with Muslims, they have a tendency to admire them. And you see that a lot in colleges because almost everybody in college knows a Muslim or something. So diversity really has educated a amazingly blind people. Obviously, as an American, I live on Native American land. It's not something I can be happy or proud of. I don't want to, be sounding like I'm superior to anyone in Israel, because America is also built on colonialism and settlerism. But, things have gotten so bad for Native Americans here. We are trying to piece together the communities. We still have a chance to stop some of that ethnic cleansing in Palestine. So there's urgency there. So this is something that is happening now that we have to stop. And hopefully it will also lead people here in America to reflect about how the occupation of Native American land has affected those communities. So the issues that started to come up that made me question this, defensive battle scenario. One of the other things that was very interesting, in addition to the music festival changing position, I did see reports from people who were at the IDF fence who said they were punished or warned when they started, because they noted that there were exercises that were different and strange around the fence, and they were essentially told, we don't care, stop telling us, and if you tell us again, you're in trouble. I got that from an Israeli source. Some of this gets very disturbing because there's a thing called a practice. I think it may have changed names. Similar to psychological operations, had a couple of different official names in the US for a while. There's a thing sometimes called the Hannibal Principle or the Hannibal Doctrine that essentially indicates that Israel will call fire down on their own position if there is a prisoner situation, because it's so politically unacceptable for them to have one of their people get captured. And Haaretz, which is an Israeli news source, their information seems to indicate that Israeli copters and other things started essentially attacking anything that moved in the area, regardless. Like they couldn't, the soldiers have said that they couldn't have known if there were hostages that they were firing on, but they were told to fire. Some of the images of the damage does seem to suggest weapons that would be more powerful than the equipment that we know that Hamas has. So this scenario, it's very disturbing. And most of my sources from this are actually Israeli. American media has tried to deflect some of this. I think recently, if you do the search on Google, it tries to tell you this is a conspiracy theory that came from Hezbollah. But on paper, we can see that it came from Haaretz. It came from Israeli sources and their soldiers. It came from the IDF that says, there are soldiers who are afraid they killed hostages. Um, now, um, this is a,
That
go ahead.
that makes sense, brother Stephen. And thank you for that. And please send me all of those articles so I can put them in the video description below. And this is like the same propaganda that they used back in Desert Storm, Desert Shield about the babies and the incubators, Saddam and the WMDs, and now about the 40 decapitated babies and all of that stuff to generate that problem reaction solution. And it's just like what the Egyptian intelligence said, that we told the Israelis that this was coming, but yet they didn't do anything about it. So I think you're right. Most Americans who work with Muslims, who go to school with Muslims, they're not falling for that propaganda anymore. That after the 9/11 world, because the internet was not that great at the time. But now with these different apps and sources and people actually living and working with Muslims, I think that propaganda is backfiring, especially with the Palestinian solidarity protests taking place globally. So I think there is something good that will come out of this. Back to you.
So, one of the other things is there's a religious minority in well, technically it's Syria because I'm not going to recognize the annexation of the Golan Heights. But occupied Syria, there's a group of people called the Druze. And the Druze religion requires them, and this is one of the things why I want to point out that technically the Golan is Syria. is technically they are required to obey their government. However, most of them fail to understand that Israel does not have a legal right to control the Golan Heights, and they therefore decide that they are in Israel, which is false. I would say they are misguided on that, but their religious interpretation says that they have to obey Israeli law, and many of them end up serving in the military. You can understand how this helps them assimilate, helps them escape oppression, and why people might make that choice. I do disagree with it, but it is understandable. They are under duress, rather serious duress. Anyway, the Golani Brigade was, because of the timing of this by a holiday, virtually all of the IDF casualties that died in the first wave were Druze. Now, the thing that's interesting about a defensive battle scenario is if you're doing it for political reasons, one of the great things you can do is target minorities that might be your opposition. So a trance musical festival and primarily Syrian Druze living in occupied Israel are groups of people that might not be Netanyahu's traditional base of support. Having this rally around the wagons were under attack, it really ends up helping Netanyahu, and these are lives that he does not apparently care as much about as he should. I really hope I'm wrong about this because it's such a scary scenario, but some of the things really start to link up that seem to say that people at the top knew that something was going to happen or chose to be extremely negligent. Um, that level of negligence is pretty hard, though, because of the way this came up. And this series of dishonesty that have come out from Israel since the event have been extremely over the top. You mentioned the supposedly 40 decapitated babies. There's been a couple of other really bizarre. And the thing that's odd is if you have truth on your side, you don't need to lie. You can let the facts, you know, speak for themselves. But we're finding that over and over again since this event, Israel prefers to lie. They seem to be going under the old spy doctrine. The only reason to tell the truth is if a lie absolutely will not suffice. So we're not getting as much truth from Israel as you would expect from an honest victim. Some of the over-the-top stories that have come out of the event just don't stand they don't stand up to the facts. So a couple of examples that seem like Israel's like really just sort of not even bothering with the truth sometimes. There's a video of an Egyptian actress who, for whatever reason, does parody videos. And in actuality, they're so over the top, they're a little bit funny. I'm not sure if anybody is supposed to think they're real or if they're kind of these gotcha things. But I believe an Israel foreign minister actually put her video where she claims to be a nurse in Gaza, and then she just lists off some of the more ridiculous Israeli talking points. And the video, though, we can confirm was shot in Egypt by an Egyptian woman who's an actress who has a tendency to sort of create bizarre lampooning videos. I'm not really sure what her motivation is. I don't know if, like, the video's so bad, no reasonable person could have thought it was real. So it may have been like an act trying to make fun of some of Israel's talking points, or she may have actually been trying to act out what she thinks is the truth because she may be very concerned about Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, or whatever. I don't know what her motivation is, but this actually got, I think it was up for like a week on one of the Israeli minister's page, and it is completely ridiculous. She is not a nurse in Gaza or doctor in Gaza. She uses her real name though, and it may actually have been intended as satire because it was ridiculous. Other things that have happened where not like obviously now there's this calendar incident where Israel put out a video of a calendar and seemed to claim that it was we have a list of terrorist names checking in. And I mean, they unfortunately for them, they showed a picture of it and it's just a calendar. It's just got the days of the week. It's got nothing. When they finally got around to showing us this supposed Hamas hideout at the hospital or their evidence on it, it looked a lot weaker from what people were expecting. Um, they said they had I don't know. The big thing was that they had a calendar and a baby bottle. Who would have thought that a hospital might have baby bottles? But they speculated that the baby bottle had to have been because of one of the hostage babies, which I mean, it's a hospital. It's the kind of thing you would have expected to find in the hospital, probably with the calendar. And I think they had like a duffel bag with a couple guns. Could have come from anywhere, as far as we know. So I'm not saying that Hamas doesn't misuse the hospital in some way. I'm not saying that we have to 100% trust all numbers out of Gaza, but most of the numbers that we're getting, we now know that the death count is way lower than what it actually is because they stopped counting and the rubble, that there's thousands of people missing in the rubble who are not going to be rescued. I hope I'm wrong on that, but it appears
yes.
that the death count is actually at this point much worse. The one thing on the death count that I would like to point out is there was an incident, and this was one of the more ridiculous lies, and I blame Blinken and Biden for this, for accepting the Israeli story. There was, and having looked at videos from Al Jazeera, we can be reasonably sure that Israel faked, and they doubled down on this because after there was a hospital explosion, they produced a very fake sounding audio and published it, which they claimed was between two Hamas fighters, supposedly blaming Islamic Jihad for hitting a hospital and causing a large explosion that injured a lot of innocent people. The thing about that is video from Al Jazeera shows that the only rocket fired from Gaza had already been taken out by the Iron Dome. And by looking at the explosion on the ground, it becomes pretty obvious that it was an artillery shell or a tank shell, and that it came from the Israeli side. And we know the kind of casualties that rockets from both Hamas and Islamic Jihad, what kind of damage they can produce. And they're not producing anywhere near the amount of destruction that was there near the hospital. I think, to my understanding, the Gaza Ministry of Health, for some reason, claimed that there were 500 people who died in that explosion. That probably was an overcount, but it was still a very, probably around 100 people were at least killed, and many more were undoubtedly injured. And at this point, the death count has gotten much higher than what the Gaza Ministry of Health has even claimed, because they have no way of getting to part of this. You'll note that almost the death toll stopped rising a few days ago as things started to break down further and further in Gaza. The audio that they supposedly tried to claim, see, this shows we didn't hit the hospital, was one of these other over the top ridiculouses. Um, I hate to say it because I support Ukraine and I want them to have victory, but Ukraine sometimes claims they intercept Russian phone calls where the Russians are just talking Ukrainian talking points. And I mostly agree with these talking points, but I recognize that these are not actually authentic Russian phone calls, that Ukrainian intelligence sometimes produces the information it wants us to hear. And we can be reasonably certain just on its face that this recording that Israel produced is not a conversation between two members of Hamas. It's their own actors. And that's very ridiculous that they're choosing to do this, that they're not being more careful, and that they're bombarding areas around hospitals in the first place. So Israel
Yep,
does not
I
seem to
I agree.
care
I
about
agree.
these hostages. The deal that supposedly has almost come through is basically the deal that they could have had at the start to get these hostages back. Hamas wanted to do a prisoner exchange. Um, and it's baffling how little Netanyahu's got. I mean, the Israeli public, there's been this massive march and massive protest about these hostages. I don't know if Netanyahu wanted like support from the hostages' families, but over the month and a half, they're started to realize that their government is not trying to they are prioritizing displacement of Palestinians over getting those hostages back. I personally, at one point in my life, I was captured, and there was a scenario where this other guy pretended um, that we were being attacked, but he was in on the attack, and it involved an attempt to essentially do a bank robbery. Um, And so I know just even briefly how horrible it is to be captive like this. And that murderer who did that to me went to jail, and I've forgiven the fake hostage, and he now does prison ministries and has moved past and tried to start a family. But the idea, one of the things that I learned from that experience is that the government never trusts you if you're a hostage. In part, as I mentioned, that there was a fake hostage, a lot of robberies and a lot of scenarios that do involve hostages. One of the first things the government will look at is if there's a hostage in a bank, is that hostage in on it? That's not something that I would have expected or known, but my experience is that's absolutely the truth, is that anybody who's captured is seen as a possible conspirator with his captor. Um, Israel seems to have possibly fired on their own people, and that's from their own people, and then launched attacks in and around hospitals that they claim that the hostages may have been taken to. I'm not necessarily sure how much medical care from the hospitals these hostages actually got, but It is very disturbing, and I'm hoping that the people of Israel take this seriously. It is a terrifying scenario when a government is not trying to protect its own people. And what can be said other than Israel, rescuing the hostages seems to be a plan B, and if maybe, it's a side project. It's not the primary objective of this mission. Primary objective seems to be they want to create a refugee crisis. Like some of the ministers and some of the statements seem to suggest that the goal here is to try and make the situation in Gaza so bad that people in Gaza choose to try to become refugees. And of course, if they do, they would never probably be allowed to come back to Palestine. Um, so that's a really horrifying scenario that creating that's a ethnic cleansing, war crime, crime against humanity to do that. It's also something driving people out of their homes is a specific sin in this age. And that seems to be more important than getting their own people back. And that's very, very scary. Israel's only negotiated for like one or like only a couple of the hostages have returned, and it seems to be a side priority for Netanyahu. Um, so I don't have enough information to fully say that Netanyahu did have foreknowledge of this event. He may be just extremely negligent, but um, as I said, circumstantial evidence. Let's say you hear a gunshot and you turn and you see somebody standing over a person who shot with a gun. Now, technically, that's circumstantial evidence. You didn't see him shoot him. But evidence like that can be enough to convict. If more things come out, and the best people to do this are actually Israelis, they're going to have more access to the statements of people in Israel. Um, and I'm really hoping that they take this seriously and look at it because the level of betrayal of these hostages and the surrounding communities in Gaza seems to be remarkably high. Netanyahu should have known if he did not know, and it's becoming almost impossible to believe that he did not know. And his reaction and the reaction of the Israeli establishment since the event um, looks like people who feel that they need to lie because they have something to hide. And if they're telling the truth, the facts would stand for themselves and they would have very little reason to lie.
I think so too, brother Stephen, and I think you laid it out perfectly. And this is a responsibility that the good conscious Israeli people who are planning to come out on the streets and protest Netanyahu's resignation anyway, they they are a part of that responsibility because of all of the innocent civilians that have died. Now, the Israelis have been caught using fake AI images in terms of what's been happening to try to justify their actions. And I'm sure they have Arabic speakers in the Israeli Mossad and other who can portray themselves as Hamas and try to make these false statements, like you said, using their own actors. Even the former Israeli soldier, as the former border patrol team member, who testified herself that there's no way that they didn't know that this was going to happen. Same with the Egyptian intelligence saying that we foretold them at least a few weeks prior that this was going to happen, that there was an offensive that was building up. So there's also that. And what do you think? My next question is, now you have people like Musk on Twitter, right? He bought Twitter because of free speech, but now he's censoring anyone who speaks out about Palestine, number one. And what do you think of the whole apparatus, even with Zelensky meeting with Netanyahu? Does that lower his credibility? And also with the actors, the sports people, they're all standing for Israel, and anyone who speaks up for Palestine, they get booted down. Does that support the theory that the Zionists control everything? So I would like your thoughts on this, and how is the Muslim community and Jewish community coming together in Chicago? Because I have seen good American Jews and Muslims protesting and even getting arrested together and being in solidarity with one another. So, what have you been seeing on all of these factors that I've addressed?
All right, I would say that Israel doesn't really control everything. However, the United States military and Western economies are based on the status quo of the Suez Canal, and they don't want that to change. Um, so we've sold out completely to their narrative. Um, it's not that we are under any magic control, though there are people like John Hagee, who I've previously shown seem to have foreknowledge of false flag events that he predicted in his Blood Moon book and series, that they basically, the current alliance where we're supporting this status quo for the Suez Canal and for Israel, they use it to try and climb and get more attention and sell more bad books about bad astrology. Um, John Hagee is a remarkable uh, he's a real piece of work. I don't know how to even say it in polite terms. Um, but America is so committed to the current situation, we sort of allow some Israeli domination. I would be a little bit dismissive of the idea that it's Israeli control. Biden is doing this because this is what Biden does. Biden has sort of been, despite all the things Netanyahu has done to insult the Democratic Party since Obama, and all the ways that it goes against our values. Um, I mean, there's dual citizenship, and it's an election year. So if you're going for president, the votes in Israel still count. Um, but I wouldn't say that it's control. I think that that overstates the relationship and leads to bad speculation a lot. As to Zelensky, he's losing um, I mean, he's losing time and he's losing resources. I expect him to go to support from anybody who can help him. Israel has some nice technology that if I was Zelensky, I would want to fight the Russians. He's between a rock and a hard place, and I think he's got to do everything he can for his own people. There are certainly some things I strongly disagree with Zelensky on. For one, the way he's treated the Orthodox Church and tried to change around the dates with the calendar. I mean, if you know anyone who's Orthodox, it's just a like I understand that the Orthodox Church is a potential place where they might expect to find Russian spies, but I believe the way that they've set up the Ukrainian church is a foolish move that's going to cause more people of faith of Ukraine to that changing Christmas around to not be Orthodox Christmas so that it can be synchronized with the West. It's a silly move because it makes, I mean, it, I'm trying to think, was it Cromwell? But like basically, if you make it so that Christmas is a protest against you, um, you put yourself in a very bad situation. So I feel like that was an error move. But I think Zelensky has to do everything he can. And if he hadn't tried, to get support from Netanyahu. His people would be like, gee, why can't we get those anti-missile rockets? I trying to think, were there other questions? You asked a rather complex question, and I may have taken too long for me to forget exactly what you said. Were there other points that I've missed?
Brother Stephen, I think you definitely covered it. And the other question that I had was, there's been a survey recently about American Jews and American Muslims, and so many of them said that in 2020 we voted for Joe Biden in the presidential election. But due to the current Israeli situation, the Israeli Gaza situation, a lot of them have said, especially in swing states like Michigan and other places, that in 2024 they were not going to vote for him. So how does that bode for the upcoming U.S. election?
Sure.
What do you think?
Well, I do think I remember the one other point that I was going to get to, so I'm going to come back to it, and that's the Palestinian and Jewish communities here in Chicago.
Yes,
Um,
yes, that
they
also.
are they're under siege, but they're standing proud, and many of them are standing together. Um, Many of American Jews often are a little bit different religiously than Jews in Israel. You find more reform and conservative Jews here in America under the American experience. And I think in Israel, Orthodox Jews are more predominant, or secular Jews. Here you get more people who are religious and still tend to the secular without it being one or the other. Um, so there's a an anti-Zionist, anti-occupation Jewish community here in Chicago, and I've been in contact with them. They are standing tall and working with uh, Palestinian protesters and with the colleges. I've also spoken to some Palestinians who own businesses. My friend Angelo, he's doing amazing. His business just expanded. He really didn't need this at the moment because, you know, he wants to sell pizza. That's his thing. He likes making people happy. He's a wonderful soul in a lot of ways. Um, and I went to go and see him. I missed him. He wasn't at the shop that day. But from what I've been told, um, they've made enough connection to the community that nobody, I was like afraid that people were going to, because I've seen some reports of increasing violence. But at least the people I know, it seems that the community's actually rallied around them. Everybody knows that that he has a good heart, and he hasn't been under threat since the event, from what I've been told by his family. I'm still hoping to catch him at work because I miss him. Um, and the rallies have been. It's been amazing to see young people taking a stand and doing the right thing, and knowing the side of history they want to be on. And it's not the side of Netanyahu. And that goes both for younger Jews and younger um, Palestinians. I've definitely noticed the media seems to, I don't know, if you listen to the media, you would get the idea that everybody wants to play cowboys and Palestinians. Um, that doesn't seem to reflect the average people on the ground here. But there is I've definitely run into some disturbing support for Israel and support for the media narrative. Um, and I really hope that when people start to understand it's Israeli sources that are saying that, yes, Netanyahu was warned. We have that over and over and over again. That, if one wants to talk about human shields, living next to a militant in a ghetto is a lot less of a human shield than being deliberately um, allowed to have them uh, do an attack and having your own government fire on you, which does seem to be the stories that Israeli soldiers have come forward with. The Israeli government actually seems to have criticized Taratz and saying you should only accept sources, official sources within the government for this information. And it's like that's not how news works. It's like if they think people are going to just go for unity and not go for truth. They don't understand. The only real unity that ends up being possible is when it's by the truth. Once you start having a lie and an internal contradiction, eventually the whole thing is going to fall apart. And it's got to be rebuilt in an honest and correct fashion. So yeah, we're seeing some really amazing Jewish voices for peace um, type protests and demonstrations where they're standing side by side with Palestinians. We've seen that in Washington, here in Chicago. Chicago is also working very hard now with the sanctuary city situation. And there's a lot of dispute if we're going to, if we want to keep doing that. The current leadership wants to continue doing that. It's taking the right stand. And um, I don't know. I'm pretty happy with my own state and my own community right now of where they're headed from where they've been. It's not perfect. There's definitely some blind right-wing suck-ups who want to go with the media narrative, but it does not seem like it seems like those uh, uh, those are older people and more and more of the younger generations are seeing the truth, making the connections, standing with each other in solidarity. Ultimately, what I think needs to happen is an end to the draft in Israel so that the people there have freedom. Because from the river to the sea, everyone's going to be free and decolonization is going to be a thing. So back to Elon Musk. Elon Musk seems to now be banning the terms decolonization from the river to the sea. We might want to use that as our the headline for this video, decolonization from the river to the sea, just because Mr.
Got it.
Musk has banned it. Um,
Got it.
which is ridiculous. Musk has a tendency to put his foot in his mouth, and seems to be having his own lawsuit with um, various people over slander. I have to say that my experience lately with the media is that the media tries to use people like Kanye West and Elon Musk in a good cop, bad cop. We want you to have borderline thinking with no nuance. And Musk almost seems willing to pull a Kanye and throw everything away just for managing snap reactions today. It's hard to figure out his exact plan, but one of the things that I've sort of been noticing is like if I do a search for what does seem to happen, where at least some Israelis fired in a way where they don't know if they hit their own people, a not so friendly fire incident, you could say, that, when I was searching for that on my computer, it wanted to say that that's a Hezbollah conspiracy theory. It didn't point that, no, this directly came from Israelis and an Israeli news source. Another one seems to be when I started to look at this possibility that it was a defensive battle, which, after Netanyahu being told by his own people, you were warned, and with the information about Egypt warning them, it just sort of like, well, let's look at that scenario. My computer wanted to tell me that it was a right-wing conspiracy theory from Charlie Kirk, I want to say, in Turning Point USA. The thing that's interesting about this is these are people that are already sort of easy to dismiss. Once you start realizing that these sources are not, this isn't a right-wing conspiracy theory. This seems to originate from Israelis who are questioning the official narrative, and many of them seem to have actually been opponents of Netanyahu who were on the left side of the political spectrum of Israel. But the media loves this sort of, if we can attach it to a marginal person, it becomes a marginal idea. I don't think, I like that he's in the electric car business, but Musk is a defense contractor. And I mean, I don't want to say too many bad things about somebody who supposedly has autism, but he could really he really could use you know he shouldn't hold his device and type directly. He should have to talk to an assistant and talk it out before he publishes some of this stuff, because he basically, like, rather, and similar to Kanye West, Musk and him and people that the media point to for anti-Semitism, they always manage to find somebody who's not saying anything about the draft in Israel or the Palestinian situation. Like, for all of the anti-Semitism from Mr. Kanye and Mr. Musk, they don't have any of the actual, like, what are the victims in Israel? How are these policies affecting both Palestinian and Israeli youth? And they're not great. Once you start looking at, so I kind of feel like the media relies on these guys to sort of deflect. And for a while, I kind of felt Alex Jones is the same way. They could just sort of, anybody who questions 9/11 is like Alex Jones, who now seems to have sort of teamed up with my nemesis, Nick Fentus, who came from this area where I am now. So I mean, I'm hoping he's in the area for Thanksgiving, because we definitely have some catching up to do. And but um, he is a real terror in the world today. I believe he almost definitely is turning some sort of state evidence and agent provocateur, because he hasn't been charged yet for January 6th. There's evidence that people have posted where he may be a government agent. He does seem to get a lot of free publicity from the media. Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene gave him a lot of free publicity, and that's not something you would expect from an anti-Semitic racist person getting a lot of free publicity. Normally, you would expect them to be sort of deplatformed and shunned. But this seems to be an example of the FBI promoting anti-Semitism. There have been other cases where they do this. I want to bring up the so-called North American Man Boy Love Association. this was kept alive by the FBI, and the FBI was promoting pedophilia for a while. They do this with their informants, where they actually end up promoting the most horrible things possible. So, in my opinion, they can try and charge me for obstruction of justice if they want, but if they're promoting anti-Semitism and that's what I'm trying to call light on, I'm not obstructing justice.
Exactly. I think they are the real criminals who are enabling these informants to do what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're targeting innocent people in fake sting operations and all of that in between. So they are the real criminals that need to be held liable by the US government and the US taxpayer.
Yeah, there was an exam, I think, connected to some of these other their court documents show at this point that numerous times the FBI has sort of supported anti-Semitism, and it's always in a very dysfunctional way. As in, it's not anti-Israel, we're trying to point out that, maybe Israeli youth shouldn't be conscripted. It's always sort of this dysfunctional thing that makes them stronger and better at the end of the day. I'm going to paraphrase a quote from John Hagee, who had predicted, of course, through astrology that there would be various attacks on the Jewish people that would be transformed into victories. Well, that seemed to me to be code for false flag events. And I started predicting by using John Hagee's when there would be a false flag massacre and started betting money on it just for educational purposes. And I won those bets. There's no way somebody is winning bets off astrology on massacres unless there's insider trading based off a religious code, which is what I believe John Hagee did. And this is sort of replatformed John Hagee. He, after blessing the embassy in Jerusalem under Trump, um, because of some of his older statements that seem to suggest that, God's plan was for the Nazis to come around so that people would flee to Israel. Really sort of a bizarre notion of God there. But he had sort of in some ways been washed up after January 6th, his association with Trump and his previous really bad theology type statements. But, a supposedly march against anti-Semitism featured him as a prominent speaker in Washington. Um, and none of these guys who have links with the government and whenever they do these things, it always ends up supporting the toxic narrative, and it doesn't call attention to the people who are actually suffering. So I would like everybody to insist that Israel do what they can to prioritize the hostages and look into if they believe Israel at this point, not just about various hospital calendars and nurse videos, but um, how much of this links to possible foreknowledge. I think if Israelis start questioning this seriously, they're not going to send their sons and daughters to join the IDF, and this whole miserable colonialist experiment of right-wing oppression will fall apart.
I hope so too, my brother. I hope so too. And which goes to my next question is how do you see the American Jewish community and the American Muslim community in terms of how now they're rebelling against Joe Biden in key states? The same people that voted for him in 2020 are now really dissatisfied with him. How do you
Well,
see this play out in 2024 with the election?
it's scary because the polls currently are showing Trump being the clear leader. Good chance his legal problems might mean one of these other clowns. DeSantis is like a major clown, but I don't want to spare Nikki Haley some criticism here. Like, this is a woman who wants to ban anonymous speech on the internet. Like, I don't know if she's even read the Constitution. It's amazing. You know, it's like the Federalist Papers were published anonymously first. It's sort of a core component that if you're going to have free speech, you've got to be able to, you know, freely be able to say things. I think that the media narrative and a lot of stuff is pushing them to the right, or to unelectable candidates that might end up taking votes away from Democrats and leading to a right-wing victory. Now, I'm very dissatisfied with Joe Biden and particularly Anthony Blinken. Bunch of bums, acting like a bunch of bums. However, if America actually selects a right-wing leader, things can get a lot worse. There are people now who enthusiastically are supporting the ethnic cleansing war crimes of trying to get as many people in Gaza to leave voluntarily as refugees and obviously never return back. So if this does go that direction, um, I want to also say that Jews who think that Trump is going to be good for them um, should look back to the Trump years. I can understand them being not satisfied with Biden. As I said, I am not satisfied with this guy. I think I just called him a bum. Um, but it does seem, I guess the one thing I kind of liked because of my comfortable situation about, you know, Trump's presidency is people that I'm glad are no longer my friends showed their true colors. But it's scary because some of these people who you don't want to be friends with, um, unstable, crazy, right-wing people are called reactionary sometimes. And the the bad choices they could make is going to marginalize every minority. Ultimately, if you're not with them, you're against them. That's sort of how the reactionary mind works. And it's very dangerous for both Muslims and Jewish Americans if a more right-wing government ends up taking over. Um, I kind of am hoping that both Trump and Biden are dead by the election because I think both of them are dead ends. Certainly at their age, it's possible. I hate to wish death on anybody, but uh, I mean, I don't see anything good from either of these two leaders. I definitely think we are worse off if we have a right-wing leadership in the United States at this time. Um, Things can get a lot worse than they are.
I think so too, Brother Stephen. And I hope those young people that are listening to this podcast who are Generation Z and who will be 18 and above during the 2024 election, that you make the right decision for the future of this country. And a lot of you are all doing a great job anyway with the social justice and social activism for all people to be equally free, whether they're Muslim, Jew, or whatever. The concept of human dignity. And I thank Brother Stephen Beyer for the education and insight and wisdom and time that he always takes to provide for us. And if there's anything that I failed to ask you, my brother, or any concluding thoughts for this podcast until next time, the floor is yours.
Well, I uh, I am really troubled by what I see in the world and what I see people willing to accept and how distracting their cell phones, sports, and fashion are. from issues that really matter. And I think when people think about this and they take time and think about it and listen to their heart, a lot of people can make a change and be on the right side of history. I particularly want to ask people in Israel, whether they're Palestinian or Israeli, to look at these scenarios closely and try to figure out how was it that the government didn't see this coming? Um, because more information is probably going to come out. And when information does come out, we know that Israel has something to hide because they've lied and lied again since October 7th. Netanyahu was facing a lot of division, and the sooner they get their house in order, the sooner they will be safe. Um, I want everybody to be safe. I want the hostages and prisoners to be exchanged so that as many people are free as possible. And I don't want to see anybody living under threat of conscription, terror, or abuse.
Thank you, my brother. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do to educate humanity and stand up for humanity, not only in Chicago, but wherever your voice and actions reach in the world. And I thank you for all that you do, my brother, and wish you greetings and peace and blessings for the upcoming seasons until our next podcast. More alaikum and thank you.
Alaikum Nur.